Okay, our next game is Gradius II, Gopher no Yabo, or Vulcan Venture, as it was known outside of Japan. It was nominated by @CrowTRobot.
Now, is that Trace Billou or Bill Corbett?
Crow. I don't know. It was developed and published by Konami. It came out for the arcade, Famicom, ported to just about everything. Well, not everything. But
it wasn't quite as prolific as Gradius, which I'm pretty sure has been on every single machine,
and which we'll have to get into, like the whole salamander life force type thing happening too. Earliest release date territory is March 24th, 1988 in Japan. What can we say? Is it really pronounced gopher?
Yeah, it's gopher.
Okay.
What a bad guy. I'm surprised it's just not like an actual gopher with like large teeth that's the enemy commander or whatever. No, it's some sort of like giant skinless brainhead. Or, well, okay, I guess that's a spoiler, but if you know anything about Gradius and like giant immobile bosses at the end are...
You know anything about shoot 'em ups? Giant skinless brain thing? I mean, how many monsters does that describe, really?
Yeah, no, it's kind of par for the course, really. But where do we start in with? Well, I keep saying Gradius. I know a lot of people say Gradius instead. I'm going to try and go with Gradius for the Vox Populi's preference in this case. But
I mean, the easiest way to think about it is, you don't pronounce it like Gladius. You pronounce it Gladius, whatever.
Because it's supposed to be a name of that Roman sword type.
Yes. So that's the easiest way.
Gladius,
so
okay.
what this actually is, even though this is called Gradius II, it's kind of a not quite sequel to not quite sequel. So it's kind of Gradius 3-ish or 4 or whatever.
It is basically Gradius 2. It's just that in between the first Gradius and this one, there was Salamander / Life Force.
Yeah, and that's, despite having a different name, it is basically considered part of the series, but with the caveat that they alternate between the horizontal and vertical levels, whereas Gradius proper is all horizontal throughout. So I guess Salamander is like Gradius 1.5?
I'm pretty sure they do.
They're basically completely different games that was sort of retroactively made Gradius. Like, they always had the Big Viper as the main ship. And it had some sort of similar weapons, like the options and all that sort of stuff. But if you play the first Gradius and the arcade version of, especially Salamander, like, they play a lot differently.
Yeah, especially if the fact that, like, the weapons in Salamander are all out in the open. It doesn't have the Gradius power bar, not until the NES port of Life Force. But I guess we'll talk more about those if and when they get ranked, because we mostly want to focus on Gradius 2 in this case.
One point real quick.
Yeah, sure.
I think they actually do consider a Life Force / Salamander a Gradius game, because if you look at the intro, they kind of go through a brief timeline, and they do show Life Force in that.
It's hiding right in this. Even when they released Gradius 2, they were clearly intending for that to take place in whatever timeline the games take place in. Also, because
canonically, I mean, they put a lot of effort into this, especially in the MSX games. Yes, they're together, and like, especially the Nintendo Life Force feels more like a Gradius game, but I still take it's more of a, like, Gradius does very specific things, which Salamander doesn't.
Yeah.
And that makes Salamander a better game.
Hey, wait. The real question to ask is Parodius considered canon too?
Sure.
I
consider Parodius canon to every game.
Yeah, it's...
all games. All games are part of the Parodius line.
According to Odomedius, every Konami game is canon up until itself, even the ones that contradict each other.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, so, what you have is, because Gradius came out in 1985, and then 3 long years later, Gradius 2 comes out correct, so...
I gotta say, I keep forgetting this game is 1988, because holy crap, it was pretty graphically advanced for its time.
Konami's, especially arcade board, was just on fire. They could, it not only looks, but sounds, like, it just looks and sounds incredible.
Yeah, and then Xerxes was only 3 years later. A game like that from 91 is... Like, I mean, well, Konami has always given a lot of graphical detail to pretty much everything they make. Graphic and sound, they always knock it out of the park. So this game's a real aesthetic banquet, no kidding. I mean, you have this sort of the gigantic suns and fire dragons in the first level, and the second one is totally H.R. Giger as all hell. And yeah, just a lot of really fantastic looking areas.
And it has a horizontal scrolling in the levels. You know, the game auto scrolls left to right, but vertically scrolls up and down. With the player control. You know, you go up, the screen goes up.
Gradius did that too, though. The original one.
Yeah.
It did?
But okay, I'd say Gradius 2 is the game that defines, like, what it is to be a Gradius game.
Yeah, exactly. Gradius 3 is basically just Gradius 2 again.
But stupidly hard.
Yeah, and same for 4, except the graphics don't look as good. 5 definitely took on some different paradigms, but that was co-developed by Treasure.
Yeah, well, Gaiden and 5 kind of go off in their own direction, and that's why I think those are better games. But as far as, like, the Gradius-y, like, this is the most Gradius you can get.
Yes, definitely.
So we're going from Gradius, which I guess most people are familiar with.
Wait.
What separates 2 from
Hang
1?
on. Now you guys are all pronouncing it Gradius, and I'm trying to keep it as Gradius. What gives?
It doesn't matter.
Gradius.
All right, we all ping-pong back and forth between them, audience, so trying to get too flustered at us.
Tell me what the difference is between 1 and 2. Why should we care about 2 over 1?
Okay, so 2, the first one, it looks like a modern game, kind of. It has really well-designed sprite graphics, but there are lots of things that age it, also, specifically that the boss is the same on almost every level.
Gradius 2 has actual bosses for 1, and I think their levels are also a lot more involved. Like, you know, every level in the first game did stick to fairly definable gimmick, but the levels still all kind of look the same up until like the 5th or 6th, but every level in 2 looks very completely different, and they each have a major gimmick to deal with. Like, the second one has you blasting through all this corroded alien garb while these spidery things from pods rain down on you. I think those were taken right from Contra, those spider pod thingies.
They definitely, at least the 8-bit port, they're basically the same sprites.
Yeah, and then level 3 is just crowded with all these crystals that you have to keep shooting until they break up, and you have to avoid them. And then the 4th level is sort of a Gradius tradition, where it's basically a homage to the very first level of the first game, but then, like, volcanoes explode, and you have to try and shoot or avoid all the rocks that flow from there. And yeah, every stage does something differently and looks very distinctive, unlike the first game where it kind of meshed together.
Well, the first game, I mean, it's been a while since I've played it, but it's there's like this cavern level, and then what's the second level? Is that the level with the pink dots? And then there's another cavern level.
Yeah,
then there's the Moai level. But
yeah.
I mean, they're just kind of like, they hadn't really developed the themes that would make distinct in the later games. And Gradius 2 was the first game that, you know, like, here's the fire stage, here's the crystal stage,
the speed level,
et cetera, et cetera. And then the speed up zone was another big thing where it would just make you go really, really fast, and you'd have to dive through the different different tunnels before you crash into the walls. Like, everything of that was set in Gradius 2, and everything that Parodius parodies, a lot of it started in Gradius 2.
Exactly. Yeah, and the fact that also it wasn't as varied as in later games, but you did have some variance with your weapon configuration at the beginning. Whether you
the 4 different weapon configs. That's one of the gameplay-wise one of the biggest differences.
I mean, the Ripple Laser originally came from Salamander, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that carried over in the various missiles, whether your double is at an angle or behind. Like I said, future games would have
the spread bomb missile, which is easily my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that one does actual damage, so yeah, it's a good thing to have. But yeah, there really is a good deal of variety and challenge to this game. But maybe the challenge might be a little too much. I mean, we're talking specifically about the arcade version, so...
Yeah, the arcade is... the first time I played this game was actually the PlayStation 1 Deluxe port, because that was before MAME and all that sort of stuff. And it's a pretty good port, but there's... the Gradius syndrome, I guess, is what you actually call it.
Let Bob talk about that. He's got a grudge against it.
Everybody has a grudge against it. Even somebody like me who loves the series.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, real quick, like... I've been pretty quiet about this game because I'm not really a huge fan of it. And there's one reason, which Kurt very distinctly described as Gradius syndrome, and that's the fact that if you die once, you lose all your power-ups, and from there, it's this constant, you just hit a brick wall, you can't make any more progress. You might as well just start over entirely if you die even once, because you're not going to be able to get anywhere. And that basically just kills the game for me. I just can't enjoy it at all.
Now, see, sometimes, depending on the game, like, it's a problem in a lot of them, but depending on the game, that's kind of the fun. Like, if you're fully powered up, the game almost becomes too easy. But if you make a mistake, that's when you get, tossed back to a checkpoint with barely any power-ups. But being able to just be really resourceful with what you can get, and you really optimize your pattern. Okay, this comes up here. This is the weapon I'm going to try. This technique didn't work. I'm going to try getting an option. I'm going to try to get as far as I can to get a shield. And when you actually make it, is really gratifying. The problem is that's not like Gradius II. My strongest memory of it is getting to one of the last levels of the game, and the scenery starts coming off, but on the top and the bottom, they start flying at you. And at that point, there is not enough power-ups for you to do anything, and you were just screwed. Like, I must have continued dozens and dozens of time to get past it, and it just was not possible. And at that point, I said, okay, that was it. And that's also one of the main reasons why I like the PC Engine port a little bit better. Because in addition to being a little bit easier, when you run out of... When you get killed in the arcade version, you just get sent back to a checkpoint. And it doesn't matter if you have any lives left or whatever. It basically doesn't matter. In the PC Engine version, if you run out of lives, you restart the stage, which sounds like it would be harder, but it allows you to power up so you're not as often stuck in those situations where you're screwed.
Yeah, the irony is that it's a design kind of fairer. It feels like it would be, but you actually, unlike almost every game ever, you don't want to be booted back to a checkpoint. You do want to be booted to where the game starts balanced. I think most of the levels are relatively balanced if you play them from the start. But
because each Gradius level starts with a navigation segment where it's just this generic enemies that's very easy to get power-ups. They're rarely very difficult. So keeping that in mind, you can at least get yourself in some sort of shape for when the level actually starts.
Hey, Kurt, I checked that bit, the flying floor and ceiling bit that you mentioned on video. I just found out that comes just before the infamous gun wall boss. So how does anyone expect you to beat that? Yeah, another Gradius quote-unquote tradition is that before you reach the really super easy, not actual boss, final boss, you have to fight just a huge wall of guns that will murder your face. And then after that, you have to survive this large invincible thing with lots of legs or a wheel or whatever. And you have to somehow...
Spider robot is just,
it's a really... The finale is almost too much. Even I have to admit that. It's where I actually prefer the NES, Famicom version, because it has a little bit less... I think it's a little shorter than the arcade version, but it's also a lot easier, and it kind of remixes things somewhat, so that's almost a very fresh game on its own right. Like, both versions are certainly worth playing, but I would say that the Famicom version is a lot more accommodating and merciful. But that's not the one we're talking about or rankings, so,
Well, it's similar to, like, the difference between Super Contra, the arcade game, and Super C, the NES game.
Hey, that's a good comparison.
Like, it's, most of the levels are pretty similar. There's some changes. There's some extra bosses in the Famicom game. The soundtracks are almost entirely different outside of sharing a few songs.
That's a good point. A lot of the...
It's a lot easier, but like if you aren't a shoot 'em up pro, then I think it's like at a good level.
Definitely. It's still a challenge, but it's not stomping your face into pulp like the arcade one is. Yeah. Although, I will say that the arcade version of Gradius II is not the arcade version of Gradius III. That game is like walking a giant stretch of coal from the Atlantic Ocean to Mars or whatever. It's horrible. Oh my god.
Given the fact that you can't continue in that game, game is basically worthless in its like
the SNES version is way superior, but we don't want to be talking the entire series. I'm sorry, I love Gradius a lot, so it's a little hard for me to just keep it to one game. It's kind of like I almost want to say not necessarily the genesis of all shmups, but shoot 'em ups, but definitely the sort of flagship series of the genre as a whole, where you can go back to say,
the defining like horizontal shoot 'em up. That and R-Type, but Gradius came first, so.
Yeah, and I still think that Gradius is still Gradius, I don't even know anymore. It's still relatively easier than R-Type. That game wants to kill you forever. In my opinion, well, it depends on which R-Type. I'm sorry, I'm just going all over the place. I'm not sure if...
You need to slow down, because we've still got to talk about Gradius II. Would you say that any enduring popularity of sort of Gradius II is more related to the ports rather than the arcade game? Because we basically were assigned the arcade game for this rank, I believe. And
good question.
The arcade game feels kind of too unfair and too money-grubbing for... as far as even a regular arcade game goes. You know, it's very, very punishing. It's pretty frustrating. And I don't really... You have all these options, you know, it provides you... it provides you with, like, you can choose all these different ship things, but you barely get to use them, because if you die halfway through the stage, that's it. You're not getting the power-ups back, and you're probably going to get wiped again and again and again. And I feel like maybe the console games that kind of rebalance the difficulty ensured that Gradius 2 would actually be kind of well-regarded and popular, because
there's not that
arcade
many...
really seems nicher.
There's not that many ports of it really that change much. It's not like the first Gradius game. Like, the Famicom game, like we said, changed a lot. But as far as the other ones, like the PC Engine one, outside of reducing the difficulty and adding an extra level, is pretty close. Yeah. The PS1 version is almost identical. The PSP version, which is the first version that actually came out in North America, weirdly, is almost identical outside of the fact that you can resurrect at any checkpoint you've previously got to. So, just taking away that barrier makes it a much more playable game. But again, if you're going just by arcade rules, I think it is probably too difficult to really enjoy, but there are still lots of cool things you could get just by putting in one credit.
Yeah, I mean, the graphics are great, the soundtrack's fantastic, the power-ups do feel really badass when you do have them, although a problem with the arcade is that you're not able to pause the game and input the Konami code to instantly get everything. But, yeah, I do have to ultimately concede. It's really, in many ways, it's a rather exquisite game, but is it a fun one? Well, I hate to admit when challenge really gets in the way of a game being fun, but this is one of those instances, I'm not gonna lie. So, that's gonna make it a little tricky to rank. If we wanted to rank it, like, I'm not sure if anyone else had anything to say about Gradius II.
When it comes to ranking, I don't think I would put it above R-Type. Because R-Type is also pretty tough, but I feel like it's a little more manageable if you don't have power-ups, because at least there you have the charge shot.
Well, the thing about R-Type...
put it below R-Type a little bit.
And especially, if we were doing Gradius 1, I think Seniority would bump it probably above R-Type for kind of throwing a lot of the defining features out there. But when it comes to it, R-Type understood that it was really hard, and so they were like, okay, well, when you die, you'll reset the stage. I know that doesn't sound fair, but you'll be able to actually get through the stage because you'll actually, learn the patterns and you'll be able to get through it. Whereas Gradius 2 is like, they'll just, I don't know, quit and come back or something, because that's what the arcade games seem to want you to do. It's just... Yeah,
they didn't really care. They just wanted your money. Like, in the hardcore shoot-'em-up contingent, their solution to that is, well, just don't die. Like, they want to one anyway. So the fact that you restart with nothing,
Cal,
doesn't
you laugh, but these people are dead effing.
No, I know they're dead
serious.
I love the. It's always when you have like to counter criticism, the get good. Like that's always like the greatest sort of concession of okay, but so you're saying it's not good, basically.
Okay, but we're ranking this for normal people, correct? I'm sorry.
If we're ranking this for normal people, it has to go below R-Type. That's
I will agree with you reality. On that. How far below R-Type? Like, what I was immediately eyeing was between Descent and Age of Empires 2, or should it go a little bit lower? I don't know.
Why those games? Like, what's the next lowest shoot 'em up? I mean, there's Blazing Lasers.
We try not to make we try not to make shmup or like game clusters in our ranking list.
I keep complaining about this, but we keep doing it anyway, which frustrates me.
I know.
So.
We just try not to. We have Ikaruga actually. That's number 51 at the moment.
I think Verga is better than Gradius II.
I do too.
Ooh, well,
I also think Blazing Lasers is better.
Well, the next game is UN Squadron. God damn you, Cal, you son of a...
Hello, UN Squadron. Happy to see you here.
I love that game and no one else does. God damn it. Okay.
All right, how about between Tex Murphy and Quirk? Because I just feel like putting putting Gradius below Quirk is just a little too embarrassing.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with Quirk. That's a great game, actually.
I do like Quirk, but I like Gradius 2 more. Evil a game though it is, there's a lot to like aesthetically about it, and it did trend set a lot for the series to come for several games down the line. So,
so what I think about Gradius 2 is that it improved on Gradius, but I think that they also just sort of looked at Gradius's problems, went, they're not problems, they'll deal with it. And
yeah, because it's an arcade game. Like, they don't really care whether it's balanced. They just care about whether you get their money.
So I think it's pretty cool, just above Quirk. You know, it's not too low, but it's not super high, and I think that's pretty generous. But I think it's good.
Okay.
I think like something like Blazing Lasers has a much easier time being, you know, considered good because it came out later. It has just a bunch of crap going on the screen, whereas Gradius 2 had to work with a little bit less and try and eke out a solid game. And it was a horizontal shmup, which I think are a little harder to make than vertical scrollers. They just seem to come out easier.
Okay. So I'm happy between Pandora Directive and Quirk. Anyone else have anything to say?
Works for me.
That does it.
All right.